My guest this morning is Mike Allen. He is the co-author of A Murder in Searcy, the book that everyone in town was talking about a few years back. The book, which Mike penned with Dina Hamby-Nall, thoroughly related the details surrounding the mid-1970s murder of local socialite Fern Rogers. That pair have just released a brand new book, The Abduction of Mrs. Ruby Lowery Stapleton, which is another case gleaned from Searcy history. Mike currently resides in the Washington, D.C. area, but is a native of Searcy and a Harding University grad. Many of our listeners are probably aware that he's the son of the noted evangelist, author, historian, and Harding professor, Jimmy Allen. Welcome, Mike, and how are things in the nation's capital?
Hey, thank you, Todd. Thanks for having me on today. Things are okay in the nation's capital. I would say we're busy in the area right now, but things are going well.
Too early for the cherry blossoms, right?
It is. Yeah, that's another maybe month or so away, I think, but that's always a nice time.
You and I actually overlapped a little bit at college. In the spring of 1985, you and Doug Buse did a morning show on KHCA on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and I did the morning show on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So,
oh wow,
small
Very
world,
neat.
Or better yet, maybe a small town.
It is, yeah, it is. Those were certainly fun times. Doing the radio show there at Harding for sure.
Before we get into the new book, let's talk a little bit about the success of A Murder in Searcy. I read it. My entire family read it. I mean, we passed this thing around for months. In fact, everywhere you went around town, people were buzzing about it. How do you feel about the sales and feedback from that work?
Yeah, I would say for Dina and me, we were quite surprised with how well the book sold and with the number of people that were reading it. And so we certainly had no idea that it was going to sort of take off like that in the White County area and really around the state of Arkansas. I would say the sales were very robust for a very long time. And so we felt very fortunate about that. Got a lot of feedback from people along the way. And so I think it was well received, that people sort of had this knowledge of the case, but didn't know the details of it. And so a lot of people seemed to, like the fact that there was a book that told exactly what happened during the investigation and the trial related to that particular case.
You know, Mike, I was recently driving through downtown past the old Rogers House property. Of course, the house is gone at this point, but it's now a city park, and I saw a big sign that said Fern Rogers Memorial Park, and that seemed new to me, so I've got to think that, at least in part, your book probably motivated them to name that park accordingly.
Yeah, I have no idea about that, but I did get word about that and was glad to hear that the park was being, named in her honor. Certainly glad to hear that.
Let's talk a little bit about your co-author real quickly. She's not a Searcy girl. How did your writing partnership come to be?
Well, I think for Dina and I, we can't exactly trace the roots of exactly how we got to know each other, but somehow, maybe, 12 to 15 years ago, we were both blogging, and we sort of got to know each other through Blog World. And I had written a book, and then I had this idea for looking back at the Rogers case. And I pitched the idea to Dina, and so she was open to it at the time, living in the greater Little Rock area. And I was, in Northern Virginia, so she was going to be someone who was there in Central Arkansas, who could follow up on leads in Central Arkansas. And so she and I met with her daughter and my wife in tow at a Wendy's in Little Rock, and we hashed out the plan to write the book, and that was probably 2014 or so. and it took us about 7 years to put the book together. But we just sort of did this as a long distance thing, and she would write part of it and I would write part of it, and we meshed it all together, and that was how that book came about.
The new book is The Abduction of Mrs. Ruby Lowery Stapleton. This happened a long time ago, Mike. I believe it's the oldest unsolved case in the history of White County. I've picked up a few scant details throughout the years, but I'm going to let you give us a little background about the story.
Sure. Yeah. I would say my earliest memories of this particular crime came growing up in Searcy. My dad tended to be unfiltered, and he would talk about whatever was on his mind. And he was, in 1963, he was on the faculty, a fellow faculty member with Mrs. Stapleton. It was at that time that this crime of her abduction took place. And it was something that sort of weighed heavily on his mind for years and years afterwards. And so he would talk about it from time to time at the dinner table or in our home. And that sort of planted the seed about this, this Searcy crime that had taken place. And when you look at it in the context of 1963, Mrs. Stapleton, and then 1974, Mrs. Rogers, there were these two prominent women in the Searcy community. There were these two horrific crimes that had taken place, and the stories themselves went beyond White County, went beyond Arkansas, even to the surrounding areas. If you look back at the abduction of Mrs. Stapleton, you see that the story went out to the news wires. It was picked up throughout Central America. The Chicago Tribune covered the story of Mrs. Stapleton. And then also with Mrs. Stapleton, you have, someone who'd been a teacher at Harding for roughly 4 decades. So the story of her abduction also spread throughout the Harding community, nationwide, worldwide, spread throughout the Church of Christ community. It was covered by the Christian Chronicle, and certainly the word just got out in those two communities as well. So it became this big story, and the story that just sort of embedded in people's minds, so that even as Dina and I were working through the research on this book, we would talk to former students at Harding who were there in 1963, and you would talk to them about these things, and it was as if it happened yesterday. Like they could still recall the details of searching for Mrs. Stapleton. For the women, they were nervous to go out after dark. I mean, just some of the very specific memories attached to the events surrounding this crime.
Mike, I'll tell you, now around town, I think this story is largely forgotten. More than 60 years old. Many of the principal characters, investigators, and associates of Mrs. Stapleton have long since passed. And I guess that would prove to be quite a challenge for you doing research for this book.
Yeah, I'll say it was a challenge. So it was different than when we wrote the book about the 1974 crime, where we were able to actually talk to 3 of the Arkansas State Police investigators who were involved in the investigation, where we were able to talk to people who really knew about the events firsthand. So, yeah, you're exactly right. This is more historical. So we were fortunate that the granddaughter of Mrs. Stapleton, her name is Heather Bates, gave us a copy of the police file. So we had that 200-page or so police file that we could work off of as our primary document. There's a lot of old newspapers available online now, so we could go back and look at those old newspapers. Certainly, you can go back and look at the Searcy Daily Citizen, as it was known at the time. I'm living and working in the Washington, D.C. area. I can go to the Library of Congress. I can pull up old Arkansas Democrats and Arkansas Gazettes from that time period. And so I can see a lot of the coverage. And through newspapers, we got to look at, the police reports. We got to talk to some people who were students at the time, but the people that actually investigated the crime, those people are long gone now. So we didn't have the chance or the privilege to talk to them at all.
Again, if you're just joining us, we are discussing the new book, The Abduction of Mrs. Ruby Lowery Stapleton, with one of the authors, Mike Allen. Mike, despite your lifelong familiarity with the case, did you uncover any new revelations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most of it was new to me. I'd heard the story, but I didn't know that there were this long list of possible suspects identified in the crime. So no one was ever specifically arrested for the crime against Mrs. Stapleton, but there was a long list of potential suspects. And it was very interesting to me to see how the investigators, it was mainly the White County Sheriff's Department, Arkansas State Police, but they worked hand in hand with the FBI, and they tracked down these suspects all over the country and did face-to-face interviews with many of them to try to determine where they were on the night that Mrs. Stapleton disappeared. And so it's fascinating as they tracked down every lead, even if the lead popped up. There was a lead that popped up maybe 4 or 5 years later. And the Arkansas State Police investigator, the White County Sheriff, tracked down every lead of that possible suspect and put together a several-page report related to that, even though it was several years after the crime had taken place. So all of that I just found fascinating.
Mike, some of the details that I've heard throughout the years might be considered kind of scandalous, maybe even a little bit salacious. I don't know how accurate they are, but with your family having played such a pivotal role in the Harding culture, I would think there might be a few people in that circle that might say, Mike, why do you want to go dredge all of this up? Has there been any backlash?
I would say not much, Todd, but I would certainly say there's been a little bit of backlash. And so I think for the most part, the people that I've talked to would say, these things happened in the past. These are, historical events that took place in the past. And so there is a book, there is a resource available there for anybody who would like to go back and see, okay, what exactly happened there, or what took place during that time. It's for people who are curious about that. And so if someone says, oh, gee, that's really tragic, I don't want to be reminded of it, I don't want to go read about it, I certainly understand that and respect that. And so, for people who make that determination, they don't go back and read the books, which is totally fine with me. But for people who say, I remember this. I remember it bothered me, as we talked to these former Harding students from 1963, they remember it. It bothered them. For the most part, they have no idea what happened after that fall semester, just no idea at all. And some of them say, in effect, hey, we would like to go back and know what happened and understand better what was going on during that time. And so I would say these two books, A Murder in Searcy, The Abduction of Mrs. Ruby Lowery Stapleton, it's for people who do want to go back and look at the details and find out what happened. And if people don't want to do that, certainly I understand that and respect those decisions as well.
Well, I will be reading it. I got to ask, how do I get the book? Is it available locally?
Yeah, I'd say right now the only place to get it is on Amazon. And so, that's where things typically start with independently published book, which this is an independently published book. And so it's available on Amazon. I would guess at some point it's going to also pop up in some libraries around Searcy or White County, Central Arkansas. That's what happened with our last book. And then there are certainly independent bookstores who picked up our last book, and I suspect that over time some of them will do the same with this book.
All right, Mike, we've got some other mysterious cases in White County. Might you consider another book with local ties?
I would say it's possible. I'm currently working on another project, but I would say you never know. I think these things are interesting, and in a way, maybe can be helpful to some people. So, yeah, you never know.
All right. Again, our guest has been Mike Allen, and the new book, The Abduction of Mrs. Ruby Lowery Stapleton. Get the book and read it. And again, I'm looking forward to it. Mike, we appreciate you calling in and having some conversation with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Todd. Much appreciated.